connect with the earth archetypes every day. You already actually have that wisdom within you. Start asking the question, why am I so afraid to become visible? Why am I so afraid to make a choice and commit to something? We seek a balance. You are a manifestation of the earth, because people who feel truly cared for, not just pripped and polished, right, will be able to nurture others.
Welcome back to Higher Density Living, where we ignite the spark of your untamed soul. I'm Jason Rigby, and today we're diving into part 2 with the visionary Mary Reynolds Thompson, author of The Way of the Wild Soul Woman. Our first episode left us buzzing with the power of her 5 earth archetypes: desert, forest, ocean, mountain, and grassland woman. And this is guiding us to reclaim our wild essence. And now, guys, we're getting practical. Chapter 8, which I told her at the end of the last episode, I said, we got to do an episode on chapter 8, and that's walking the way of the wild soul woman. And Mary reveals how to weave these archetypes into your daily life. So we're going to talk about sacred altars, seasonal rituals, bold steps to heal yourself and the planet. So I think this is going to be a good one where we can break free from the cage of the ordinary and live as the radiant, earth-connected soul that we were born to be. Thank you, Mary, for being back on the podcast.
Thank you, Jason. It's lovely to be here with you.
Yes. I want to get into chapter 8 today because I love practical. You know, we can stay esoteric and be in the clouds all we want, but to be grounded. And you start off with how you stand at your wild soul woman altar and creating a sacred altar. Can you go from a practical aspect? Can you go into creating a sacred altar, what that looks like and what it is?
Sure, absolutely. So a sacred altar in terms of a wild soul woman is a way of evoking the 5 earth archetypes that you mentioned in a way that's accessible to you. So I have this rocky outcrop. I'm pointing because it's sort of up and out there, and it allows me to access all of the archetypes. So I point myself to the east for desert woman, and I point myself to the north, thinking of those great boreal forests, forest woman. And then I know the Pacific Ocean is over to my west, so I think about that for ocean and river woman. And then there's the beautiful Mount Tamalpais where I am in Marin County, and she is my mountain woman. And then I look down to the ground of my feet and I see Grassland Woman. And so it is a physical place in nature that allows me to connect with the earth archetypes every day. But there are so many ways to do that. So for people who don't have access to those places, you can create a journal and collage the 5 archetypes just to keep them in your being. Or you can create a little altar with a bit of sand and water and plant and so on and so forth in a way that speaks to your soul, that can change over time. I had one person, which I absolutely adored. She created a portable altar. So she would take it with her. It was like, a little briefcase. And she would open it up and all of the archetypes were represented. But it's simply a way of symbolically arousing the energy of the archetypes within us.
Do you feel like the sacred altar, because when we look down through, eons, decades, generations, we see this. When did this get lost? Is there a time, and especially from the feminine aspect of things, being the wise ones, the spiritual leader, those were prominent, especially when it come to, the sacred altar, the witch, that we always talk about. Do you think it was in those puritanical times when this started getting purged out?
That's a great question. I think it's not that there aren't sacred altars, because you can think about, every church and mosque and so on and so forth. Right. But it's just that they started to be taken over by the monolithic religions.
Right.
And the big ones. So they are existing, but this idea of something that's a little bit more pagan, a little bit more connected to the earth, I think that all began back in the so-called Age of Enlightenment. But altars still exist. But the question is, what's the kind of altar that is going to speak to your wild soul?
Yeah, I know, tuning into archetypal wisdom. And, you mentioned that one archetype's energy often surges forward, offering insights, for what you need to know in the moment. How can our listeners develop that inner compass? How can we sense when an archetype is soulfully trying to speak to us?
Well, first of all, you've got to get to know the archetypes. Read the book.
Right.
Yes. And experience them all and become familiar with the qualities of them. Now, you already actually have that wisdom within you, but this will sort of be a real compass and guide for you. So then once you've recognized the qualities and characteristics of each archetype, you can begin to recognize when that archetype is most active within you. So for example, if you walk into your office in the morning and all you can think about is cleaning the clutter and getting clear, it's probably desert woman who's at work.
Yeah.
If you are kind of worrying up, if there's a worrying word, maybe mountain woman is really speaking to you. So as you get to know these archetypes, just as we have with all the other ones that we work with in life, the more you know their qualities, the more you begin to realize how they manifest most particularly in you. And then, of course, the great question is that the one that you want to be most active in you on this particular day?
Yeah, I know, because they could speak loudly, but the shadow could too, right?
Yeah, and it's not only that, absolutely, because every archetype has a shadow. And so beware that. And often the shadow is, you can recognize you're in the shadow of an archetype when you can't actually move out of it, that there's that energy of you just have to. So, for example, going back to Desert Woman again, if you're in the shadow of Desert Woman, you might get to a place where you're so isolated that you almost become a little bitter towards people who seem to have more friends, you just encrust yourself with so many prickly spines and cactus-like attributes that you aren't living fully. So everyone has its shadow side. But the other thing is they're not equally useful in every situation. So sometimes when I go to my altar, the question is really, this is how my day is going to play out. Is there an archetype here that wants to step forth inside of me as my ally for the day? Because, I know for me, that mountain woman, though it sounds like so strong and everything like this, it can become a little feisty. And if I'm going into a delicate, sensitive situation, probably mountain woman, for me, for somebody else, it might be perfect, but for me, it may not be the best archetype to be my ally. And maybe I need Grassland Woman, who is all about connection and community, or maybe I need Ocean and River Woman who will put me into this heart place. Because maybe if I'm going into an awkward situation, I've lost touch with my heart. I've sort of armored up and I'm no longer connected. So these are all nuances that you get to play with. And there's no absolute prescription because, as I say, archetypes always manifest differently in each person. We each have a different relationship with them. But as we get to know that, we can become very, very nuanced and aware of which ones can best serve us in the moment, serve our spiritual soul growth.
Mary, I know, and we talked about this, in the other chapters of the book, but like when I talk to a lot of different women, they always talk about being hurt, whether it was a childhood or whether it's, a spouse, whatever it may be, a friend that talks against them. When you're going to the altar and you're trying to develop this inner compass, how do you distinguish the hurt from like what you're experiencing? Do you ask, the archetype to help you with that? If there's like, what if you come to the altar and there's something that needs to be dealt with? Like you're having an issue with, let's say, a friend that you found out she gossiped on, with other people, and now you're really hurt, because you thought she was a close friend. How do you come to the altar then when there's this feeling of baggage?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's actually really interesting because, as I think I might have mentioned in our first interview, is I'm running a year-long program around the archetypes with a group of women, one of the things that really comes up is anger.
Mm.
What do women do with their anger? Because a lot of us have a lot of rage that has been suppressed because we're not supposed to be angry women, right?
Mhm.
And you always hear women who are being targeted, they're called angry. So one of the things I think is to recognize any hurt, any anger, any feeling that feels stuck
Mhm.
and becomes stagnant and that you feed and sort of allow to take over your system is unhealthy. So even if you're totally justified in being hurt, if all you do is nurture that hurt,
Mhm.
it's not going to help you. So emotions are meant to move. So Ocean and River Woman is a very good one about flowing. And what Mountain Woman says is, yes, you're hurt. Your friend said something really horrible and it's had a terrible impact on you. What are you going to do about it?
Mhm.
In other words, sitting there, nurturing your hurt is not the answer. So Mountain Woman, if you dialogued with her, might say, I think we're setting yourself up for quite a challenging conversation. And let's get clear about what hurt you so much about what happened. And let's get really clear about that. And then when you feel ready, let's have that conversation.
Yeah, and I know, in navigating a shadow, you had a health scare from over-identifying with the Mountain Woman's do-it-all energy. And that was a powerful lesson. I want you to share that. Whenever that restoring the balance, and I think the story kind of helps with that, but can you go over that?
Yeah. So and I've sort of mentioned it, I think you're pointing towards the fact that certain archetypes balance out other archetypes.
Yes,
Is that what you're referring
yes,
to?
yes.
Yeah. So say I'm in this absolute angry state, right? Roiling. Nothing wrong with anger, by the way.
Right.
Yay. It's a great indicator that something is amiss and everything like that. And Mountain Woman is the one that says, use it for good, right action. Don't sit on it. Use it for right action. But Ocean and River Woman might be the one that you go to say, I think there's a current under my anger. There's something, why does it run so deep for me? Why is it that I seem to be angry all the time? And then she allows you to start asking the questions about, okay, let's go a little below the surface, let's get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so there's this sense that certainly with feeling, she's the one to go to. If it's something else, if you are a creative person and you love to create, but you actually spend your entire time in the forest coming up with ideas, seeding plans, anybody recognize that? All these delicious things that you are going to go and do, but you never get round to actually fulfilling on any of them.
Right.
Then maybe you need to go to the mountain and have a conversation with the Mountain Woman and say, why am I so afraid to become visible? Why am I so afraid to make a choice and commit to something? What is going on? So they're all of them. And, the desert is really balanced, that solitariness by Grassland Woman. So there's constantly these balancing outs, which again, you'll learn as you move along. But we are meant to work with all of them. You never just say, oh, this is my favorite one. I love being desert woman or whatever it be. No, that's unhealthy. So it's always a balancing because that's what nature seeks, right?
Yes,
balance.
yes.
And we seek a balance.
Yeah, I see a lot with women. They'll say, well, I'm stuck or I'm procrastinating or I want to do this or I can't do that. But then when you ask them, it's like, well, how do you do with your kids or your partner? And they're like, oh, I'm fine. I'll give to my kids. I do all this stuff. So I'm like, well, that's not your problem. You're not really procrastinating. You just will give to your kids and surrender to your kids, but you're not willing to give to yourself. And so a lot of times it's like I don't love myself. I won't take care of myself. So you'll not go to the gym. You'll not, eat healthy. You'll not do all the things that you're supposed to do, work on the side project that's going to make you money. You won't do those because that's just you. So do you see what I'm saying? So I think
do.
a lot of times the mountain woman, that do it all energy, is kind of making sure that you put the oxygen mask on first, like this is for me. I need to do this for me because I love me, if that makes sense.
It does. And for me, this thing of self-care
Mm-hmm.
really, I love your analogy of putting the oxygen mask on first. But in fact, I was just talking with a bunch of friends about that the other day, how in these times, while it may seem very narcissistic to be worrying about your own health and your own well-being when so much is going on, is actually essential if we're going to do the work we want to do in the world. But for me, it's very much Grassland Woman. And I think for me, there's this kind of split that's going on in the self-care world, which is there's a lot of new age narcissism.
Yes. Yes.
It's really propelled by things like TikTok and misinformation about, if you just drink, tons of cider vinegar, you'll be fine, or whatever it be. The choice of the day. Yeah. And also this pressure to be a certain body and, to look a certain way, and all of these things, which are very shallow and really kind of take us away from this deep, deep nurturing that we need. And when we realize as wild souls that we are the earth in human form, one of the questions I always ask is, would you do that to the earth? Would you push it? Do you agree with pushing it, exploiting it, extracting from it, just taking everything you can from it? No, I think that's terrible. We have to stop all that. Great. Then why are you doing it to yourself? Why are you doing it to yourself? Because you are a manifestation of the earth. And there's this other thing that I was just reading the other day that I really loved by a guy called Kleinbell, who's a pastoral psychotherapist. And he talks about 3 aspects of the ecological self. And he says the first one is in reach. So this is about that self-care and nurturing. And in his book and in my book is very about sourcing that nurturing from the earth through nature connection, through all, taking a walk and feeling the wind in your hair and listening to birdsong and all of those things. But then that creates upreach. So once you're nurtured, you feel a sense of spiritual energy often, a kind of surge of kind of inspiration that comes to you. But then it goes to outreach, where you use that nurturing, that spiritual energy to take right action in the world to make things better. So for me, self-care, completely devoid of any sense of responsibility to the greater good, whether it be just in your family or your back garden or whatever it be, is incomplete. We look to care for ourselves because people who feel truly cared for, not just pripped and polished, right? And pummeled or whatever, but really truly nurtured, will be able to nurture others.
Yeah, that's so good, because you see it so many times. I've fallen in this trap too. Next thing you know, I have a 3-hour morning routine. Where it's a cold plunge, and then I got to do the sauna, and then I got to go lift weights, and then I'm drinking, like you said, the apple cider or hydrogen water or whatever it may be. So you fall into all this, and like you said, it's just it's almost like it's a form of narcissism, where it's like, I can't do anything, I can't talk to him, I got to get these 3 hours done for my day to be great.
Right.
Instead of just putting on, like Jesus, putting on the sandals and just serving constantly.
Yeah. It's funny because Thich Nhat Hanh said something which really just delighted me. He said, you Westerners are so funny. He says, you think meditation is you have to spend, 3 hours, sitting and everything like this. He said, that's so funny. 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a meditation. It's like our kind of Western industrial point of view of more is better has us so often take everything to the extreme, right?
Oh, yeah, it's that way. Mother Teresa said one that was so good. She said, if you can be 100% present, just looking at the, in the dirt in your fingernails, meditating. It's just so simple that it's like, oh, you're so right about that.
Yeah.
It's like, what part of us has that desire to do more? What part of us feels like we're not complete unless we're operating at this 100%, where it's just, basically just draining our gas tank.
One of the things that I think about, and I've, shared about my alcoholism and the fact that, I've been in recovery for many, many decades, but addicts and alcoholics talk about the black hole that you can never fill, right? You just go on and it can never be filled. I think that separating from nature, this was absolutely traumatic to the human psyche and soul. And that's left us, because just think about this. There used to be this whole world that was nurturing you, that had meaning, that held cosmologies, that helped you find that special purpose that you were here for, that allowed you to find your familiar, your animal ally, that allowed you to be seen and drawn out by community to be the very best that you could be. And we've lost all that. So there is this tremendous vacuum inside of us that we keep thinking is going to be filled by the more, the better, the more. And it never is, because it's not the problem. The more is not the problem. The problem is the initial wound.
Oh, that's so good. And that gets into, I want to get into desires, because this can be misleading. And I know you tie specific desires to each archetype, like the desert woman's craving for space. Like, I just need to, everybody was joking around on Mother's Day. There was a lot of memes and stuff. It's like, why does Mother's Day have to, entail me and my kids? Why can't I go have a spa day or something, but like desert woman's craving for space, or Grassland Woman's urge to connect. How do you explain desires? How do you know if it's like a desire that may be a shadow desire, something that may be right for you, or something that makes you feel alive and it is soulful?
It's really hard. And I'm not always sure that I know. I mean, quite honestly, it's like, what I think about is, I think of like sacred longings. I think about things that when I am receiving and feeding a sacred longing, I feel so complete within myself. I feel so at peace. I feel so joyful. And for me, the superficial desires, and it could be for anything, right? The high doesn't last, right? You get the buzz, but it doesn't last. And that's what we're being fed all the time, these sparkly, superficial, shiny object desires. Right. And we're all going, blah, 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 blah. And then we get it. And then 2 days later, we want the next thing because it's not enough. But when you fulfill a sacred longing, it's enough. It's this feeling of being on purpose in your own life, that you are living the purpose of your own life.
Yeah. Do you feel like, like, let's say desert woman's craving for space and that desire that comes into you, how do you convince women that it's right and that is something that you should do if that's this impression that you're getting, to move away from, you know what I mean? Like desert woman.
Yeah. So I never try and convince anybody.
Yeah, that was the wrong word. Right.
And I never use should.
I heard that somebody said you should all over yourself,
Yeah, right. But
yes.
But I think once they are introduced to this concept and perhaps understand that this inability to take time for themselves, to be by themselves, to experience some solitude and quiet and stillness has been trained out of them. In other words, it's not natural not to want a little bit of time to oneself, to dream, to do even very, communal cultures tend to have things like vision quests and stuff, which allow somebody to go off and be quiet as a rite of passage. So it hasn't served the patriarchy if women spent time not, in solitude saying, no, silence, I'm in my room dreaming dreams and go away. That doesn't serve the patriarchy. So we've been really trained to feel deeply uncomfortable with taking time for ourselves. So that's what the more, is setting the context, the realization that so many things that we think we feel aren't actually our feelings. They are things that our society, our families, the culture have imbued into us.
But Mary, as well as I do, if a woman came to her husband and said, hey, I just need to take off for 3 or 4 or 5 days a week and go be alone, I'm feeling like, unless they have a really good relationship. But I would say most men would be like, what's wrong? That'd be the first thing they would say. So you are right about that patriarchal, because why isn't there why is that freedom not allowed?
Well, so I'm going to push back a little bit here because, if you're raising children and a man went to his wife and said, or his partner and said, I'm going to go off for 5 days a week and I mean, that would be trouble.
Right.
So I think one of the things is, and this is where you've got to be real.
Yeah.
And that's part of Desert Woman, is you've got to look realistically at your situation. Now, if the woman said to her partner, I need a week, a year to go off, and just that's so important to me. Can we make it happen? How can we do that? That's something. Yeah. And also, or even when I come home from work, could we make it that I could have 20 minutes to be quiet and decompress, to find myself, to gather myself, to do these things. So we're working with the realities of our situations. And for many couples, same sex, non-same sex, or whatever, just if you are working and raising children, time is probably the most precious commodity you have. So it is something that needs to be negotiated with compassion, but then you're finding accommodations where you can reach for a little of that. And with your partner, and maybe your partner will say, oh my gosh, thank God you said that, because I felt the same way,
Yes, yeah. And you can come up with, there may be, situations where, somebody may have had fear in sharing something like that, whether it's, a partner that wants to go fishing, for an afternoon, but hasn't said that in 6 years.
Yeah.
In the garage, the fishing pole will sit there. So yeah, that's great. This goes right along with aligning with seasons. And I know in chapter 8, you beautifully linked the archetypes to seasons. This is something I learned a long time ago, is like, there's a reason why it's cold and dark outside. And there's a reason why summer's like longer and, more warm, and you talk about the archetypes of seasons as woman with late autumn, mountain woman with summer. How do you make and create these seasonal rituals inspired by the archetypes?
Well, I think one of the ones I really love is with Desert Woman. So she is, as you said, she's autumnal, and because she's about letting go, right? She's about letting go of everything that is no longer yours to carry. So one of the things is to go out in nature in a season that is dropping leaves and all kinds of things everywhere, and to gather those things. And as you gather them, to think very intentionally about what each one represents, about what you are willing and want.
That's good. Yes.
To let go of, and to do that. And then, if you think about Forest Woman, the dark womb, winter, dreaming, one of the most beautiful things you can do is, journal in the dark just by candlelight, because the quality of your journaling will be so different than if you do it, different lighting. To keep a dream journal is another kind of ritual, a marking of passage to really honor the wisdom of the night, to honor the wisdom of winter, and to honor the dark, to really see the dark not as this empty place of terror that we've been taught, but as a very fecund place. And then with Ocean and River Woman, one which is really about, spring melt, things beginning to flow again and everything like that. Any ritual that can take you to a body of flowing water, where for me, one of the rituals that I talk about is to speak your sacred longings to the river, to simply allow that, to talk about what is deep, deep in your soul. And at first, you'll probably just chatter on the surface stuff, but the more you allow yourself just to speak what you long for, or if you're uncomfortable doing it out loud, writing in your journal, you'll find the longings get deeper and deeper. And then there's one for Mountain Woman who's really, summer action, surge of energy, manifesting, so on and so forth. And one of the ones that I really love is to build a cairn. Cairns are those things that you find on the mountains, which represent where the path is, and people leave them, especially in places where it's not really clear which turn to make, and they'll put a little rock cairn. And you can see everywhere now, people are building these incredible cairns. And so to make a cairn, to think about everything that you want to manifest and have it all built on your values, so that every stone and rock you put down is an invitation into standing on the values, the things that you really care about, your creativity, integrity, truth, compassion, whatever it be. And then with Grassland Woman, she's really about that early harvesting, that when the bounty of everything you've experienced is coming to fruition. And so, to make gift baskets, to think about things that you could offer to other people, little gifts, or to do a seed packet and say, these are the seeds I've sown and now I get to nurture them. So there are so many ways, and I really invite everybody to either delve into their own ancestry and think about how their ancestors celebrated these different seasonal shifts and to incorporate that, or just create your own. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be anything. It just has to be meaningful to you.
Do you feel like so many people, because even if they're hiking or running or they're out in nature, it's so, I need to look at my watch. Okay, I'm doing a 6-minute mile. I've hiked for, 3 miles. We're also caught up into that we don't take the time, like you said, to, how do you make the connection? Because I love what you said was like Desert Woman is looking at the leaves that's fallen and then seeing what, not just doesn't serve me, but what I need to stop carrying. This doesn't belong to me anymore. This belongs to my mom. This belongs to my dad. That was their thing, not mine. How do you try to interpret nature's cycles and then nature in and of itself when you're out there? How do you make that connection like you did with the leaves or with the rocks? Is there a way that you teach for that?
Well, nature is a little, literally a series of metaphors, right? And as you know, I work a lot with poetry. So for me, everything is a metaphor and an image in nature as well as an actuality. And I don't want to step away from the very real nature of nature. But our language was built on nature metaphors. And so we absolutely get them. You don't have to teach somebody. A kid knows that a leaf falling is letting go of something. I mean, we get that one thing stands for another. And metaphor literally means crossing over, to have something cross over. So it's actually a deeply ecological way of speaking and language, because it's always making these connections. And we do it automatically. We are always doing that. So if you slow down, you will naturally discover these metaphors. And so it's really more about awareness, attitude, and just taking, you can do your 3-mile, allergies, power hike, but take 5 minutes halfway through in a particularly special spot to notice and see. And just say, just ask yourself, what's the metaphor that's appearing now? And you may just see right now all the spring flowers coming up. And you might ask yourself, what's beginning and flowering in my life right now? And you've got yourself a metaphor.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know, and you reframed the hero's journey to a more of a feminine perspective. If you don't mind, I would love for you to get into that, because we always see the hero's journey from a masculine sense. I mean, I make that problem being, it's kind of like the hero with the sword and slaying the dragon.
Yeah.
So how do you reframe it?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. And Maureen Murdoch, who wrote The Heroine's Journey, was really disappointed when she asked Joseph Campbell, who was the one who really brought this whole concept of this hero's journey that was in all cultures forth. And she said, well, what about the women? And he said, well, they're what the men come back to. They're waiting like Penelope, constantly weaving, and Odysseus will finally make it back to her. Yeah, little, and she was not exactly satisfied with the answer. So she read the heroine's journey. So the thing is that women want to be the protagonists in our own stories. Mm-hmm. This is the biggest thing. And we don't want heroes to slay dragons because, dragons feel a bit like dinosaurs and we don't like killing off dinosaurs. Right. Or any living creatures. And also we want to be our own fire-breathing dragons. Yes. If anybody's going to breathe fire, let it be us. So there's that sort of bigger sense of the thing. But in terms of the archetypes, and it was really only after writing them that it came to me that they absolutely fell into the classic arc, but from the feminine, was that Desert and Forest Woman are about that initial separation. So always in the Shiro's journey, we have the Shiro needing to leave community. Mm-hmm. Right? Somebody comes into town, news is spread, and the hero has to go off on a journey. Mm-hmm. And so Desert Woman is that place of silence and quiet that a woman goes to. Forest Woman is that deep, introverted, dreaming, not being public. Everything is going on underneath the surface in this rich, dreamy place. And they're not as engaged with the doing, giving, supporting everybody else in their lives. They're beginning to move into that I am also myself, and I also need quiet, and I also have my own dreams. And then you always have the ordeal, right, in the Shiro's journey, It was slog through the forest with the, evil witches and God knows what else. And so in this journey, Ocean and River Woman and Mountain Woman are the ordeals. Because once you begin to ride what I call the river of your wild wanting, right? That deep desire, it's turbulent. Things change. The riverbanks have to shift in your life. Things are going to happen, and people for the first time are really going to notice something is going on, right? You can kind of get away with Desert Woman work and Forest Woman work in a much more quiet. But now, if I have decided to own my passion about something, people are going to notice it.
The journey's real. When you're on the water.
And the same with Mountain Woman, right? This is where you taking that deep, deep longing and you're actually putting into the world as manifestation. So yeah, and that is an incredibly vulnerable place to be, especially in the world that we live in. And so that is the ordeal. Those two are the ordeal. And then Grassland Woman is the Shiro's return, which is often the most challenging aspect of a Shiro's journey, because you've had the wild adventures and now it's back to the everyday life, after the ecstasy, the laundry, it's this sense of how do you weave everything, the sacred medicine you offer, the new enlightenment, the new ideas, etc., back into your everyday life, and find a group of people who will recognize what you offer, who will embrace the new manifestation, the newly evolved you, and will be community for you.
I love that. And I know we talked about in the last podcast with Mountain Woman being the manifester, and you just mentioned that. And I love this. Do you feel like there has to be the desert, the forest, the river to be able to understand the power that you have in manifesting, to have the transformation, to go through that hero's journey, to be able to, because everybody wants to skip to reading a book, to manifest. Do you see what I'm saying? Everybody wants to skip all that and go right to the mountain, if that makes sense.
They do. And there's a lot of pressure in our society. As soon as you get an idea, as soon as you think about something, it's when you're going to do it. When will it be there?
Yes.
Blah, blah, it's just really, really, let's see the product. And no, it's, if you're going to create something that's really worthwhile, it's got to come from the very depth of who you are. And to get to the depth of who you are is not an overnight experience.
Yes, 100%.
Right?
Yes.
And it'll take the time that it takes. And it's okay. What I found with my own work, as I was making sort of the shift from my old life to this life of poetry therapy and wild soul work and everything like that, was I created little mountains that weren't quite on point, but were sort of moving me closer. They were like foothills, if you like. So I had a company called Write the Damn Book, and I helped people write their books. And it was based on a hero's journey. It was based actually on The Wizard of Oz, all of those things. And so it kind of was, I didn't know I was going to end up here, but in a way it was sort of moving me in the right direction. And then I had a lot of different iterations of what I was going to be, who I was going to work with, until I got to the work of the wild soul. And there's a wonderful poem by a poet called David Ignato. And he says, people cry out, don't do it. Don't climb that mountain. Don't. But the message of the poem is, they say you could die there. You could die on that mountain. And this is the kind of thing we get when we're really going for something. Oh, no. And we say it to ourselves, right? It's too scary. It's too much. And he says, no, because this is my pathway to living, because it's my mountain to climb. So much of that is finding what is your mountain. And I really want to emphasize the point that it doesn't have to be grandiose. I think I mentioned this before. It can be, the smallest thing that is your mountain, and you do it really, really well and with all your heart and all your care. It doesn't matter what it is. That is what the world needs.
Yeah, that's so good. And, I want to get into metaphors, because you talk about like the undammed river or the grass is holding soil as paradigm shifters, that a lot of times in our life will spark change. What does that look like fueling transformation, and looking at these metaphors, maybe for you personally or for someone that's trying to shape their path, when you come across these metaphors?
Yeah. So we are swimming in metaphors. The market is king.
Right.
Life is brutish. Yeah. Nobody says that anymore because it feels, it's like, it doesn't feel like a box of chocolates anymore.
Right.
But that's a perfect example, Jason, a perfect example. So we're imbued with these metaphors. Oftentimes we don't even realize we're living them, right? Yeah. This whole idea of we're the king of the heap, right, as humans. That's one that we just assume. We don't even think about it. But we're living it, and we're living out the consequences of that kind of metaphor. So metaphors are these living symbols that hold our beliefs and that are very, very powerful, because metaphors live in the body. Metaphor is a very embodied language. People will die to defend a metaphor. Right? So if we can shift our metaphors to metaphors that are sustaining, loving, connecting, powerful in a, not power top-down way, then we are doing deep inner work, right? For example, the other thing is that metaphor gives form to the abstract. So if we don't have a metaphor for something, we can't really talk about it. It's too abstract. It's formless. So it gives it form, but that's what gives it power. So with the metaphors that I lay out, these earth archetypes, which spawn many, many metaphors, and you mentioned a couple of them, it's suddenly we have a language to speak about our inner landscapes, right? The inner landscape of the soul. And that becomes very, very powerful. So one of the metaphors that we have is, say, of the desert, is terra nullius, which means land of nothing. Well, so that's a very powerful. When Western people first laid eyes on the Australian outback, they just thought it was land of nothing. So they felt entitled to do anything they wanted with it because it was nothing. Well, if we talk about the desert in different terms of the desert, being like a hidden secret or a mysterious secret. And suddenly we realize there's something there that is powerful, that we may have to tread gently to find, may take time because it is mysterious, it's secret, but it will come to us. Or a reluctant lover, or, any of those things, it changes your relationship. So metaphor is all about relationship. And if you want to change your relationship to anything, you need to change the metaphor.
Yeah, I
Make
love
sense?
Yeah, I do. And I think for listeners, like Carl Jung talks about symbols being metaphors,
Right.
and then, like in a symbol that, like for the American flag, and how many people had made a metaphor off of that and have given their lives for that, whether rightfully or wrongly, we can discuss that politically, but it is powerful. Like, whenever you see the symbol or the metaphor, and those are things that are, and he believed those were things that were guiding you, in the right direction, like your soul would speak. Cause I know he talked about finding a certain rock. He kept finding this rock in a lake, that was not indigenous to that area, so it's like something speaking to me here, and is that kind of like what you're looking at, is when you see these things that are kind of maybe, kind of different or not all there, like synchronicities, is that the metaphor that's coming up, that's speaking to you and being like the matrix of the world is like, hey, pay attention to this, and then that allows you to do the work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I, lead people outside as well. If we go for a kind of, I love the term that Robin Wall Kimmerer gives it, a metaphore, which is you're going out actually. Each person will be attracted to some different symbol. So one person might see a little rock covered in moss and just be held, arrested in a way, their attention by it, fascinated. Or somebody, it might be a tree, or for others, it might be this bird that they see. Everyone different because it's mirroring something inside of them. So there's this wonderful quote from Lawrence Durrell saying, each landscape asks the same question. I am watching myself in you. Are you watching yourself in me? And this is metaphor. You're attracted to the metaphors that mirror something that's going on inside of you. And that's true in nature, whatever. So if you go for a walk in nature, just notice what you're drawn to, because this is a conversation, a kind of a call and response between you and the natural world, and get curious about it.
Yeah, that's so amazing. We're coming up on the hour, so I want to ask one last question, Mary. This has been just absolutely super deep, which I love, and I know our audience is going to love. At the end of chapter 8, you frame the journey as an ongoing, not a one and done, and then you talk about bare feet pounding on naked earth, telling a new story. What could you leave our audience with? And how could listeners start crafting their own rewild?
Well, I think that I actually wrote, there's a sense of the new story has to be about our connection to the earth, right? So one crazy idea that I want to offer your audience is that you try writing your story, just a small portion of it, from the perspective of something other than human. So maybe as a kid, you had a favorite tree, or a favorite beach you went to, or a favorite place on the mountain, everything. Actually have that place observing you as a little child, if that's the part of your life you're going to, and writing about you in the context of that landscape, watching you, observing you. So what happens there is you're developing deep empathy, because you have to imagine yourself into that rock or that tree or whatever is going to tell the story, right? So imagine from a rock's perspective what this little child might look like. Observe. So you already beginning this sense of deep connection. And then you're weaving yourself as a being into a wider context of the more than human world. And you will be amazed at what emerges from those observations. And again, it doesn't have to be as a child. It can be any point in your life. Maybe last weekend you went somewhere and you really noticed something and you want to write it from that perspective. So have fun. Creativity and imagination is is where it is at.
I love that. So it'd be like that tree that you grew up with, that you climbed all the time when you were a kid.
Yeah.
That tree would talk to you at 9 years old.
It wouldn't even just talk to you. It might say something like, here he comes again. This little guy in his red shorts. And I know what he's going to do, because every time he sees me, and I am so delighted because I've been a little lonely standing here. And when I see his little legs running towards me, I feel that. And then what he does is that. And there is. And so he's telling the story of observing you and how you are in this relationship in place.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, it just kind of brings, I think it makes it like personifies nature. You know, it brings it.
It does.
It brings it to more of a personal, and it establishes that connection, especially if you go to something, whether you go on a hike once a week or something like that. I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And can I just say one thing very quickly?
Yes.
Because a lot of people say, well, you're over anthropomorphizing and it's wrong to personify. But quite honestly, we have veered so far in the other way of thinking that everything other than human is, has no inner life, no anything, that I think it's perfectly good and even necessary to engage in these kinds of imaginary exercises.
Yeah, we wouldn't have religion and gods and all that if we didn't anthropomorphize things. I mean, come on, Shiva, the crazy, the chaos, you have to have that for creation to exist, so you got to have the grizzly bear and the shark, the great white shark, so everybody always talks about that. I agree with you 100%. I don't think it's, everybody's like Disney, they ruined everything by making the animals talk or whatever, but we're finding out plants have language.
Yeah.
It's more than
absolutely.
More than Disney. Yeah. That's that. Mary, can you go into your website, what you have going on right now? I know you've got some courses and stuff. And then of course we're going to have the show note to get the books that you've written, and your website, but can you go into what's going on right now and how listeners can get involved with you?
Yeah, just go to my website, which I know that you're going to list, I think MaryReynoldsThompson.com. You'll see with my events, anything that's coming up next year. It isn't until 2026, but I'll be doing a speaking, The Trees Are Speaking. So anybody who is like madly in love with trees, it'll be a great course. I'm also going to be running my online membership, deep dive into the way of the wild soul woman. There'll be other courses. If you live in Pacific Grove, I'm going to be there May 30th. Love to see you at the library. Yeah. And so it goes.
Yeah. And so you'll have all that on your website, MaryReynoldsThompson.com. And HDL listeners, we encourage, get the book. You're going to love it. If hopefully you've listened to part 1, you got to listen to part 1 to part 2. But Mary, is such a pleasure and a blessing to have you on Heart and Seed Living.
Jason, thank you so much.